In 1990, I was sold by my father. 35 years later, the shocking truth is revealed. An investigative report by Sarah Mitchell. The rain hammered against the windows of the small coffee shop in downtown Portland as I sat across from Maria Santos, a woman whose story would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, sacrifice, and the lengths people go to protect those they love. At 52, Maria carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had weathered storms that would have broken most people. But it was the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup that told me this conversation was going to be unlike any interview I'd conducted in my 20-year career as an investigative journalist. "I need you to understand something before I tell you this story," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For 35 years, I believed my father sold me to strangers for money. I hated him. I spent decades in therapy trying to understand how a parent could do such a thing to their child. But 3 months ago, I discovered the truth. And it's going to destroy everything you think you know about what happened that night in 1990. The night that changed everything." The story begins in the summer of 1990, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in East Los Angeles. Maria Elena Santos was 17 years old, a senior at Roosevelt High School with dreams of becoming a teacher. Her father, Roberto Santos, worked double shifts at a meatpacking plant to support his family of 5. Her mother, Carmen, cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet. They were poor, but they were together. "We weren't rich, but we had each other," Maria told me, her eyes distant as she recalled those days. Papa would come home exhausted, his hands cracked and bleeding from the cold, but he'd still help me with my homework. Mama would fall asleep in her work uniform, but she never missed a parent-teacher conference. We were a real family. Everything changed on the night of August 15th, 1990. Maria had been studying for her SATs when she heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. This wasn't unusual. Money was always tight, and her parents often argued about bills. But this conversation was different. There were other voices, men she didn't recognize, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "I crept to the top of the stairs and listened," Maria recalled. "I heard Papa saying something about the arrangement and it's the only way. Then I heard one of the men say, 'She's perfect. Young, healthy, no questions asked. 5,000 now, 5,000 when it's done.'" The teenager's blood ran cold. Were they talking about her? Within minutes, her father was climbing the stairs, his face pale and drawn. "Misha," he said, using the pet name he'd called her since childhood, "you need to pack a bag. You're going on a trip." "Where?" Maria asked, confusion and fear warring in her chest. "Just pack," Roberto said, unable to meet her eyes. "Trust me." Those would be the last words her father would speak to her for 35 years. Into the unknown. The men who came for Maria that night were not what she expected. Instead of the rough, dangerous-looking criminals she'd imagined, they were well-dressed, middle-aged, and spoke with educated accents. The older one, who introduced himself only as Mr. Davidson, had kind eyes and a gentle manner that somehow made everything more terrifying. "Your father has made a very difficult decision," Davidson told her as they drove through the empty streets of Los Angeles. "But I want you to know that you're safe. We're not going to hurt you." "Where are you taking me?" Maria demanded, her voice cracking with fear. "Somewhere you'll be taken care of," was all he would say. The drive lasted 6 hours, winding through the desert highways of Southern California before finally stopping at a large, isolated ranch house surrounded by high walls. Maria would later learn they were somewhere near Bakersfield, but at the time, it might as well have been another planet. The house was luxurious by her family's standards. Marble floors, expensive furniture, and a swimming pool that sparkled under the moonlight. But the windows were barred, and the doors were locked from the outside. "This will be your home for a while," explained Mrs. Harrison, an elderly woman who seemed to run the facility. "You'll be well fed, well cared for, and you'll continue your education. But there are rules." The rules were simple and terrifying. No contact with the outside world. No phone calls. No letters. Complete obedience to the staff. Any attempt to escape would result in severe consequences for both Maria and her family. Life in captivity. For the next 18 months, Maria lived in what she would later describe as a gilded cage. The facility housed 12 other girls, all between the ages of 16 and 19, all with similar stories of being sold by their families under mysterious circumstances. We called it the ranch, Maria explained. On the surface, it looked like some kind of private boarding school. We had tutors, we studied for our GEDs, we had structured meal times and exercise periods, but we all knew we were prisoners. The girls were told they were being prepared for something, but none of them knew what. They underwent extensive medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and what the staff called cultural training, lessons in etiquette, foreign languages, and social graces that seemed designed to make them more marketable. I thought they were training us to be high-end prostitutes, Maria said, her voice heavy with the weight of those memories. That's what all of us thought. We'd heard stories about human trafficking, about girls being sold into the sex trade. It made sense. We were young, we were vulnerable, and our families had clearly been paid to give us up. But as the months passed, Maria began to notice inconsistencies in this theory. The girls weren't being prepared for sexual exploitation. Instead, they were being educated, refined, and cared for in ways that seemed almost loving. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a child psychologist who worked at the facility, would later testify in court about the complex dynamics at play. These girls weren't being prepared for traditional trafficking scenarios, she explained during the eventual trial. They were being groomed for something entirely different, something that, in its own twisted way, the perpetrators believed was a form of salvation. The first revelation. In March of 1992, nearly 2 years after her arrival at the ranch, Maria's life took another dramatic turn. She was informed that she had been selected and would be leaving the facility. The other girls looked at her with a mixture of envy and terror. No one who left the ranch ever came back, and none of them knew what selection really meant. I was terrified, Maria admitted. I'd been there long enough to know that leaving meant something permanent was about to happen. I'd convinced myself I was about to be sold to the highest bidder. Instead, Maria found herself on a plane to Switzerland, accompanied by Mrs. Harrison and a man she'd never seen before, a distinguished gentleman in his 60s who introduced himself as Dr. Wilhelm Brenner. Maria, Dr. Brenner said during the flight, I want you to know that everything that has happened to you has been for your protection. In a few hours, you're going to meet your new family. They've been waiting for you for a very long time. The plane landed in Zurich and Maria was driven to a beautiful estate in the Swiss countryside. There she was introduced to Hans and Ingrid Mueller, a wealthy couple who had been trying to have children for over 15 years. They welcomed her with tears in their eyes and arms wide open. They told me I was their daughter now, Maria recalled. They had papers, legal documents that showed I had been legally adopted. My name was changed to Maria Mueller, and as far as the Swiss government was concerned, I had always been their child. The Muellers were kind, loving parents who gave Maria everything she could have dreamed of, an excellent education, travel opportunities, and most importantly, unconditional love. But the nagging questions about her real family never left her mind. I tried to ask about my birth parents, about how the adoption had been arranged, Maria said, but Hans and Ingrid would always change the subject. They'd get this sad, distant look in their eyes and tell me that some things were better left in the past. Building a new life. Despite the mysterious circumstances of her arrival in Switzerland, Maria gradually built a new life. She learned German, excelled in her studies, and eventually graduated from the University of Zurich with a degree in international relations. She married a fellow student, Thomas Wagner, and had 2 children of her own. But the questions about her past never fully disappeared. I would lie awake at night wondering about my real family, Maria explained. Did they miss me? Did they ever think about what happened to me? And most of all, why did my father sell me? What was so terrible about our life that he felt he had to get rid of me? For decades, Maria tried to push these thoughts aside. She built a successful career as a translator for the United Nations, raised her children, and maintained a comfortable middle-class life in Geneva. To the outside world, she was a success story, a woman who had overcome a difficult childhood to build something meaningful. But inside, she was haunted by the image of her father counting money while strange men took his daughter away. The search begins. In 2020, as the world went into lockdown due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Maria found herself with time to think, perhaps too much time. Her children were grown and living their own lives, and her husband was working from home. For the first time in years, she was forced to confront the questions that had been lurking in the back of her mind for 3 decades. I decided I needed answers, she said. I was in my 50s. My adoptive parents had passed away, and I realized I might never get another chance to learn the truth about what happened to me. Maria hired a private investigator in Los Angeles named David Chen, a former LAPD detective who specialized in cold cases and missing persons. Chen had helped dozens of adoptees reconnect with their birth families, but Maria's case was unlike anything he'd encountered. When Maria first contacted me, I thought it was going to be a straightforward adoption search, Chen told me during a phone interview from his Beverly Hills office. But when she started describing the circumstances, the midnight pickup, the cash payment, the isolation facility, I knew we were dealing with something much more complex. Chen's investigation began with public record searches, trying to trace the Santos family from their last known address in East LA. What he found was deeply troubling, a family's desperate secret. According to Chen's research, the Santos family had been living under constant threat in the months leading up to Maria's disappearance. Roberto had witnessed a brutal murder committed by members of the East Side Locos, one of LA's most violent gangs, and had been scheduled to testify in a high-profile trial. The family was in witness protection, but it wasn't working, Chen explained. There had been 3 attempts on Roberto's life, and the gang had made it clear that they would target his children if he didn't recant his testimony. Court documents from 1990, which Chen obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, painted a picture of a justice system overwhelmed and underfunded. The witness protection program was in its infancy, and families like the Santos were falling through the cracks. Roberto Santos was a man caught between impossible choices, said former federal prosecutor Margaret Walsh, who worked on the case in 1990. He could testify and risk his entire family being murdered, or he could stay silent and let dangerous criminals walk free. Either way, his children were in mortal danger. It was then that Roberto was approached by someone claiming to represent a private protection service, a shadowy organization that promised to keep his family safe by relocating them to secure facilities until the trial was over, and the gang members were behind bars. They told him it would be temporary, Walsh explained. A few months at most. The children would be well cared for, educated, and returned to the family once the danger had passed. But Roberto Santos never lived to see that day. The ultimate sacrifice. On September 3, 1990, just 3 weeks after Maria had been taken to the ranch, Roberto Santos was found dead in his apartment, the victim of an apparent home invasion. The official police report listed it as a robbery gone wrong, but Maria's investigation would later reveal a far more sinister truth. Papa was murdered because he testified, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. He knew he was going to die, and he made arrangements to save us before it happened. Chen's investigation uncovered a complex network of legitimate adoption agencies, private security firms, and wealthy families who were willing to pay enormous sums for healthy, intelligent children. While some of these operations were undoubtedly criminal, others existed in a legal gray area, providing genuine protection for families in desperate situations. The organization that took Maria wasn't traditional human trafficking, Chen explained. They were providing a service, relocating children from dangerous situations to wealthy families who could protect them. The problem was that the families often weren't told the full truth about where these children came from. Hans and Ingrid Miller had been told that Maria was an orphan from a war-torn region, a child who needed a home and protection. They had no idea that her father was alive when they adopted her, or that she had siblings who were grieving her disappearance. The other children. As Chen's investigation deepened, Maria learned that she wasn't the only Santos child who had been relocated. Her younger brother, Carlos, then 15, had been sent to a ranch in Montana where he was eventually adopted by a family of cattle ranchers. Her sister, Anna, just 13 at the time, had been placed with a family in Canada. We were all saved, Maria realized. Papa didn't sell us. He gave us a way to save our lives. The discovery was both heartbreaking and liberating. For 30 years, Maria had carried the belief that her father had valued money more than his children. Learning that he had actually sacrificed everything, including his relationship with his children and ultimately his life, to protect them, changed everything. But it also raised new questions. If Roberto Santos had arranged for his children's protection, why hadn't they been told the truth? Why had they been allowed to believe they were abandoned? The network exposed Chen's investigation eventually led him to Dr. Wilhelm Brenner, the man who had accompanied Maria to Switzerland in 1992. Now in his 90s and living in a nursing home outside Vienna, Brenner was willing to talk about his role in what he called the Guardian Network. "We saved over 300 children between 1985 and 1995, Brenner told Chen during a recorded phone interview. Children whose families were being targeted by gangs, cartels, or other criminal organizations. We gave them new identities, new families, and most importantly, new lives away from the violence that would have killed them." The Guardian Network, according to Brenner, operated with the knowledge and unofficial cooperation of certain elements within the FBI and local law enforcement. When traditional witness protection programs failed or weren't available, families could pay to have their children relocated through private channels. The secrecy was necessary, Brenner explained. If the children knew the truth about their situations, they might try to contact their birth families, potentially exposing everyone to danger. It was kinder to let them believe they had been abandoned than to live in constant fear of being found and killed. But the network's methods were controversial, even among those who supported its goals. Children were separated from their families without their consent, given false identities and told lies about their origins. Many of the adoptive families were kept in the dark about the true circumstances, creating a web of deception that would take decades to unravel. The price of protection. As I delved deeper into the Guardian Network's operations, I began to understand the moral complexity of what Roberto Santos had done. In 1990, his family was living under a very real death threat. 3 other witnesses in the same case had already been murdered, along with 2 of their children. Traditional law enforcement had proven inadequate to protect them. Roberto Santos was facing an impossible choice, explained Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a specialist in family trauma who has studied cases like Maria's. He could keep his children close and watch them be murdered, or he could send them away and never see them again. For a parent, there is no right answer to that dilemma. The financial aspect of the arrangement, the money that Maria had witnessed changing hands, was revealed to be far more complex than simple human trafficking. Roberto had mortgaged his apartment, sold his car, and borrowed money from relatives to pay the Guardian Network's fees. Rather than profiting from his children's disappearance, he had bankrupted himself to ensure their safety. The money wasn't payment for selling his children, Chen discovered. It was payment for saving them. But this revelation raised another troubling question. If the Guardian Network was legitimate, why did it operate in such secrecy? Why weren't the children ever reunited with surviving family members? And why did the organization disappear completely in 1995? Leaving hundreds of families with no way to reconnect? Unraveling the truth, the answers to these questions emerged slowly, as Chen traced the network's operations through a maze of shell companies, false identities, and encrypted communications. What he discovered was an organization that had started with noble intentions, but had gradually become corrupted by the enormous profits involved. The Guardian Network began as a legitimate effort to save children, Chen explained. But over time, the people running it realized they could make enormous amounts of money by placing children with wealthy families who were willing to pay premium prices for healthy, intelligent kids. By 1992, the network was charging adoptive families upwards of $50,000 per child, while paying birth families only a fraction of that amount. The difference went into the pockets of the organization's leaders, who were living lavishly while traumatized families on both sides suffered in silence. Dr. Brenner, who had served as the network's chief medical officer, admitted that he had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the organization's evolution. In the beginning, we truly believed we were saving lives, he said. But as time went on, it became clear that some of my colleagues were more interested in profit than protection. Children who could have been safely reunited with their families were being kept in the system because they were too valuable to release. The network's downfall came in 1995, when a former employee turned whistleblower and provided evidence to federal investigators. The subsequent investigation led to the arrest of 7 key figures, including the network's founder. But by then, the damage had been done. Hundreds of families had been permanently separated, and the complex web of false identities and forged documents made reunification nearly impossible. The search for siblings. Armed with this new information, Maria began the difficult process of searching for her siblings. Carlos, she learned, had been adopted by the Morrison family of Billings, Montana, and had grown up believing his parents were killed in a car accident. He was now a successful veterinarian with 3 children of his own. Anna, the youngest, had been placed with the Dubois family in Quebec, Canada. She had become a social worker, dedicating her life to helping children in foster care, perhaps driven by subconscious memories of her own traumatic separation from her family. Finding them was like putting together pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for 30 years, Maria said. Each piece revealed part of the picture, but the full image was almost too overwhelming to process. The reunification process was complicated by the fact that all three siblings had built new lives based on false narratives about their past. Carlos had spent decades grieving parents he believed were dead. Ana had undergone therapy to deal with what she thought was abandonment trauma. Maria had spent years hating a father she now realized had died trying to protect her. The emotional reckoning. The first reunion took place in Denver, Colorado, in February 2025. Neutral ground chosen to accommodate all three siblings' travel schedules. I was privileged to witness this extraordinary moment as three people, who had been torn apart as children, came together as adults. I looked at Carlos and Ana, and I could see Papa's eyes in both of them, Maria told me, tears streaming down her face as she recalled that day. They were strangers, but they were also my family. It was like looking into a mirror that showed me who I could have been if things had been different. The reunion was emotional, overwhelming, and complicated. The siblings had to reconcile their invented memories with newly discovered truths, process decades of misdirected anger and grief, and figure out how to build relationships with people who shared their DNA but not their experiences. It wasn't like the movies, Carlos said during our phone interview. There wasn't an instant connection or a magical healing moment. We were three damaged people trying to figure out how to be siblings again after 35 years apart. Ana, speaking from her home in Montreal, was even more direct. I was angry at first, angry at Papa for making that choice, angry at the people who kept us separated, angry at myself for not searching sooner. It took months of therapy to work through those feelings, uncovering the final truth. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. In April 2025, Chen made a discovery that would fundamentally change how the Santos family understood their story. While searching through recently declassified FBI files related to the Guardian Network investigation, he found a series of letters that Roberto Santos had written to his children in the months before his death. The letters, which had been intercepted by federal investigators and held as evidence for over 3 decades, revealed the full depth of Roberto's sacrifice and his plan for eventual reunification. My dearest Maria, one letter began, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are old enough to understand the truth about what I had to do. I want you to know that not a day passes that I don't think about you and your brother and sister. I want you to know that everything I did was because I love you more than my own life. The letters detailed Roberto's plan to keep his children safe until the gang members were convicted and imprisoned, at which point he intended to reveal the truth and bring his family back together. He had been working with FBI agents to document everything that had happened, building a case that would not only convict the criminals who threatened his family, but also expose the Guardian Network's illegal activities. Papa was going to be the star witness in 2 major federal cases, Maria realized. He was trying to tear down the whole system from the inside. But Roberto's plan was discovered before he could implement it. On the night of September 3, 1990, he was murdered by gang members who had learned about his cooperation with federal authorities. His death was made to look like a random robbery, and the letters he had written to his children were sealed as evidence in a case that wouldn't go to trial for another 5 years. The bureaucratic nightmare, the revelation that Roberto had intended to reunite his family, raised troubling questions about why the children were never told the truth after his death. Chen's investigation revealed a bureaucratic nightmare that had kept the Santos siblings separated long after the original threat had passed. Federal agent Patricia Kowalski, who had worked on the original Guardian Network case, explained the complications during a phone interview. After Roberto Santos was killed, his children became wards of an investigation that spanned multiple jurisdictions and agencies. The FBI knew where they were, but the children's safety was considered paramount. The decision was made to leave them in their placements until the gang members were convicted and sentenced. But the legal process dragged on for years. Appeals, mistrials, and jurisdictional disputes meant that the original case wasn't fully resolved until 1998, 8 years after the children had been separated from their family. By then, the children had been in their new homes for so long that disrupting their lives seemed cruel, Kowalski admitted. Maria was already in college in Switzerland. Carlos was thriving in Montana, and Ana was doing well in Canada. The social workers involved in the case felt it would be traumatic to uproot them again. The decision to maintain the separation was made by committee, with input from child psychologists, social workers, and federal agents. But no one ever asked the children themselves what they wanted. "We robbed them of their agency," Kowalski acknowledged. "We made decisions about their lives without consulting them, and that was wrong. But at the time, we genuinely believed we were acting in their best interests." The legal battle. Armed with this new evidence, Maria and her siblings filed a lawsuit against the federal government, the surviving members of the Guardian Network, and the agencies that had kept them separated. The case, Santos v. United States, became a landmark in family reunification law and government accountability. "This case represents a fundamental violation of civil rights," argued their attorney Rebecca Martinez during opening statements in federal court. 3 children were separated from their family and kept apart for decades based on decisions made by bureaucrats who never consulted them about their own lives. The government's defense was that all actions had been taken in the children's best interests and that the threat to their safety had been very real. They produced evidence of the gang's violence, documentation of the threats against the Santos family, and testimony from child welfare experts who supported the original decision to keep the children in protective custody. "The state has an obligation to protect children from harm," argued federal prosecutor James Morrison. "Roberto Santos understood that his children were in mortal danger, and he made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure their safety. The fact that the system wasn't perfect doesn't negate the fact that these children are alive today because of the actions taken on their behalf." The trial lasted 6 months and featured testimony from former gang members, federal agents, social workers, and the siblings themselves. The jury ultimately found that while the initial separation had been justified, the continued separation after the threat had passed constituted a violation of the children's constitutional rights. Justice and reconciliation. In November 2025, the court awarded the Santos siblings $4.2 million in damages, along with a formal apology from the federal government. But for Maria, the money was less important than the official acknowledgement of what had happened to her family. "It wasn't about the money," she explained. "It was about the truth. For 35 years, I believed my father had abandoned me. I needed the world to know that he was a hero, not a villain." The case also led to significant reforms in how the government handles witness protection and family separation cases. New protocols now require regular review of family separation orders, mandatory consultation with children old enough to participate in decisions about their placement, and clear timelines for reunification efforts. Maria used her portion of the settlement to establish the Roberto Santos Foundation, a nonprofit organization that helps families separated by violence and government intervention to reunite. The foundation has already helped over 50 families reconnect and provides counseling services for children and adults dealing with separation trauma, healing old wounds. The process of rebuilding their relationship as siblings has been challenging but rewarding for Maria, Carlos, and Anna. They now speak regularly via video chat, have introduced their children to each other, and are planning a family reunion for the summer of 2026. "We can't get back those 35 years, Anna said during our group call. "But we can build something new moving forward. We can honor Papa's memory by being the family he died trying to protect." The siblings have also worked to reconnect with other members of their extended family. Their mother, Carmen, had remarried in 1995 and had 2 more children, but she never stopped grieving for the children she believed had been sold. The reunion with her surviving children has been emotional and healing for everyone involved. "Mama always knew something wasn't right about Papa's story," Carlos explained. "She knew he loved us too much to sell us, but she also knew he was desperate to protect us. When she learned the truth about what really happened, it was like a weight she'd been carrying for 30 years was finally lifted." The ripple effect. Maria's story has had far-reaching implications beyond her immediate family. Other families who lost children through the Guardian Network have come forward with their own stories, leading to additional investigations and lawsuits. Several adoptive families have voluntarily helped reconnect their adopted children with birth relatives they never knew existed. Maria's courage in pursuing the truth has opened the door for dozens of other families, Chen noted. "We're seeing reunifications that we never thought would be possible." The case has also highlighted the ongoing challenges faced by families in witness protection and the need for better oversight of private adoption and child welfare organizations. Dr. Hernandez, the family trauma specialist, believes that Maria's story represents a broader pattern of institutional failures that continue to affect vulnerable families today. The Santos case shows us what happens when well-intentioned systems fail to maintain transparency and accountability, she said. Children and families pay the price for bureaucratic decisions made in their name, but without their input. Confronting the past. One of the most difficult aspects of Maria's journey has been confronting her feelings about the Guardian network and the people who ran it. While she now understands that the initial separation was intended to protect her, she struggles with anger toward those who kept her family apart long after the danger had passed. "I understand why Papa made the choice he did," she said. "But I can't forgive the people who kept us separated when they knew we could have been safely reunited. They stole 30 years of our lives together, and no amount of money can give that back." Dr. Brenner, the former network medical officer, has expressed remorse for his role in maintaining the separations beyond their original purpose. "We told ourselves we were protecting these children," he said during our final interview. "But at some point we became the very thing we were supposed to protect them from. We became the people who were harming families in the name of helping them." Several other former network employees have come forward with similar admissions, leading to additional civil lawsuits and calls for criminal prosecutions, though most of the statute of limitations periods have expired. The children of the Ranch Maria's case has also brought attention to the other children who passed through the Guardian Network's facilities. Many, like Maria, were successfully placed with loving families and went on to build productive lives, but others weren't so fortunate. Jessica Lynn Thompson was 14 when she was taken from her family in Detroit in 1991. Unlike Maria, Jessica was placed with a family that was abusive and exploitative. She ran away at 16 and spent years on the streets before eventually rebuilding her life as an adult. "Not all of us got lucky," Jessica told me during a phone interview from her home in Phoenix. "Some of the families that took us in were worse than the situations we were supposedly being saved from." The network's screening process for adoptive families was often inadequate, prioritizing financial resources over emotional suitability. Several children were placed in homes where they suffered neglect or abuse, creating new traumas on top of the original family separation. "The Guardian Network's greatest failure wasn't in the children they saved," explained child welfare advocate Dr. Michael Chen, no relation to the private investigator. "It was in the children they failed to protect after placement. The lack of follow-up and oversight created opportunities for exploitation that continue to affect these individuals today." The adoptive parent's perspective. The story becomes even more complex when viewed from the perspective of the adoptive families who welcome children from the Guardian Network. Many of these families were told partial truths or outright lies about their children's backgrounds, making it difficult for them to provide appropriate support and care. Ingrid Mueller, Maria's adoptive mother, passed away in 2018, but Hans Mueller agreed to speak with me about their experience. "We were told that Maria was an orphan from a region affected by civil conflict," Hans explained during our video call from his home in Zurich. "We were never told that her birth parents might still be alive or that she had siblings. If we had known, we would have done everything possible to maintain those connections." Hans and Ingrid had always been open with Maria about her adoption, but they could only share the information they had been given. The false narrative about her origins prevented them from helping her process her real trauma and grief. "We loved Maria as our own daughter," Hans said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I realize now that by not knowing her true story, we may have inadvertently contributed to her pain. No child should have to grow up believing they were unwanted when the truth was that they were loved so much their parent died to protect them." Many other adoptive families have expressed similar regrets. Support groups have formed to help these families navigate the complex emotions involved in learning that their children's adoptions were based on deception, even when that deception was intended to protect everyone involved. The psychological impact. The psychological impact of Maria's story extends far beyond her immediate family. Dr. Sarah Kim, a trauma specialist who has worked with several Guardian Network survivors, describes the unique challenges they face. These individuals are dealing with a form of complex trauma that's difficult to categorize, Dr. Kim explained. They experienced family separation, identity confusion, and decades of false beliefs about their origins. But they also experienced love and care from their adoptive families. Processing these contradictory experiences requires specialized therapeutic approaches. Maria has been in therapy since learning the truth about her father's death, working to reconcile her anger about the separation with her gratitude for the life she was able to build in Switzerland. "I'm angry and grateful at the same time," she said. "Angry that I lost so many years with my real family, but grateful that I had Hans and Ingrid, who loved me unconditionally. It's confusing to hold both feelings at once." The therapy process has involved not just individual counseling, but also family sessions with her siblings and even joint sessions with Hans Muller, her surviving adoptive father. "We're all trying to figure out how to move forward," Maria explained. "How do you blend two families that were created under such traumatic circumstances? How do you honor the memory of a father who died to save you while also honoring the parents who raised you? There's no roadmap for this." The investigation continues. Even as Maria and her siblings work to rebuild their relationship, Chen's investigation into the Guardian Network continues. Recently declassified documents suggest that the organization's operations were more extensive than previously known, with facilities in at least 12 states and connections to international adoption rings in Europe and Asia. "We're finding evidence that the network placed children not just with families in the United States but around the world," Chen revealed. "There may be hundreds more families out there who don't know the truth about how they came together." The investigation has also uncovered evidence of political corruption, with several high-ranking officials allegedly receiving payments in exchange for looking the other way while the network operated. While most of these officials are now deceased or retired, the revelations have prompted calls for a congressional investigation into the federal government's oversight of private adoption and child welfare organizations. "This story is bigger than just one family or even one organization," said Congressman David Rodriguez, who is leading the congressional inquiry. "It raises fundamental questions about how our government protects vulnerable families and whether adequate oversight exists to prevent these kinds of abuses." The international connection. Chen's investigation took an unexpected turn when he discovered that the Guardian Network had connections to similar organizations operating in other countries. Through encrypted communications found on seized computers, investigators learned that children from the United States were sometimes exchanged with children from other nations, creating an international network of family separations. "We found evidence of American children being placed with families in Switzerland, Germany, and the United Kingdom, while children from those countries were brought to the United States," Chen explained. "It was like a global shell game, making it nearly impossible for families to track their missing children." This discovery has prompted international cooperation between law enforcement agencies in multiple countries. Interpol has opened a special task force dedicated to investigating these cross-border family separations and helping survivors reconnect with their birth families. Maria's case has become a template for these international investigations. Her successful reunification with her siblings has provided hope for other families, while also demonstrating the complex challenges involved in rebuilding relationships after decades of separation. The community response. The public response to Maria's story has been overwhelming. After the court case received national media attention, hundreds of people came forward with similar experiences or information about missing family members. The Maria Santos Foundation has been flooded with requests for help, forcing Maria to expand its operations and hire additional staff. "I never expected this kind of response," Maria admitted. "I thought I was telling one family's story, but it turns out there are thousands of families dealing with similar situations." The foundation now operates a nationwide database of missing children and separated families, working with law enforcement agencies and private investigators to facilitate reunifications. They've successfully reunited 47 families in their first year of operation. Community support has come from unexpected places. Hans Muller has become one of the foundation's largest donors, contributing both financially and by sharing his perspective as an adoptive parent who was deceived by the system. "I cannot undo the pain that was caused," Hans said, "but I can help ensure that other families don't suffer the same separation and deception that we all experienced." The media spotlight. The national media attention has been both a blessing and a curse for the Santos family. While the publicity has helped their foundation reach more families in need, it has also brought unwanted scrutiny and criticism. "Some people think we should just be grateful for the lives we were able to build," Anna said. "They don't understand that you can be grateful and angry at the same time. You can appreciate the love you received while still grieving for the love you lost." The story has been featured on major news networks, podcasts, and documentary series. Netflix has optioned the rights to Maria's story for a limited series, with the proceeds going to support the Foundation's work. But Maria has been careful to maintain control over how her story is told. "This isn't entertainment," she emphasized. "This is real trauma that real families are still dealing with. If telling our story can help other people find their families, then the exposure is worth it. But I won't let it be exploited for profit." The next generation, perhaps the most profound impact of Maria's discovery, has been on her own children and those of her siblings. The next generation of the Santos family is learning about their grandfather's heroism and their family's complex history. Maria's daughter, Elena, now 25, has become involved in the Foundation's work, using her background in social media and digital marketing to help families search for missing relatives online. "Learning about my grandfather changed how I see our family," Elena told me. "I always knew there was sadness in my mother's past, but I never understood the full scope of what happened. Now I feel connected to a legacy of sacrifice and love that goes back generations." Carlos's son, Roberto, named after his grandfather without knowing the full story, is studying law with the intention of working on family reunification cases. Anna's daughter, Carmen, named after her grandmother, has become a child advocate, working specifically with children who have been separated from their families due to violence or government intervention. "It's like Papa's sacrifice is continuing to bear fruit through his grandchildren," Maria observed. "They're carrying on his work of protecting families, just in a different way." The ongoing investigation. The investigation into the Guardian Network and similar organizations continues to evolve. Recent technological advances in DNA analysis and digital forensics have opened new avenues for identifying separated family members and tracing the organization's operations. "We're using genetic genealogy and advanced database searches to identify children who were placed through these networks," Chen explained. "Every month, we're making new connections and helping more families reunite." The work has revealed the true scope of the Guardian Network's operations. Between 1985 and 1995, the organization facilitated the placement of over 800 children with adoptive families. While many of these placements were legitimate responses to genuine threats, others appear to have been motivated purely by profit. "We estimate that at least 200 children were kept separated from their birth families unnecessarily," said FBI Special Agent Maria Gonzalez, who leads the current investigation. "Our goal is to help every one of those individuals learn the truth about their origins and reconnect with their families if they choose to do so." The moral questions. Maria's story raises profound moral questions that don't have easy answers. Was Roberto Santos right to sacrifice his relationship with his children to protect their lives? Were the federal agents who kept the family separated acting in the children's best interests? How do we balance child safety with family preservation? "These are the kinds of impossible decisions that parents and authorities face every day," explained Dr. Hernandez. "There are no perfect solutions when children are in danger. Roberto Santos made the best choice he could with the information and options available to him. But the case also highlights the importance of transparency and accountability in child welfare systems. The secrecy that was intended to protect the Santos children ultimately caused them additional trauma by preventing them from understanding their true circumstances. Secrets in child welfare systems almost always cause more harm than they prevent," argued child rights advocate Dr. Jennifer Walsh. "Children have a right to know their own stories, even when those stories are painful or complicated." A father's love. Vindicated for Maria, the most important outcome of her 5-year investigation has been the vindication of her father's memory. The man she had spent decades hating is now revealed as someone who made the ultimate sacrifice for his children's safety. "I visit Papa's grave every time I'm in Los Angeles now," Maria said. "I tell him about his grandchildren, about how Carlos became a veterinarian like he always wanted to be, about how Anna is helping other children who've been separated from their families. I tell him that we understand now. I tell him that we forgive him." The Santos family has also worked to correct the public record about Roberto's death. Previously, his murder had been classified as a random crime, with no connection to his role as a witness in the gang trial. The new investigation has led to his death being reclassified as a targeted killing, and his name has been added to a memorial for crime victims and their families. "Papa died a hero," Maria said simply. "It took 35 years for the world to know it, but the truth always comes out eventually." Lessons learned. The Santos case has become a catalyst for broader discussions about family preservation child protection, and government accountability. Social work schools now study the case as an example of how well-intentioned interventions can have unintended consequences. The Guardian Network case teaches us that protecting children requires more than just removing them from dangerous situations, explained Dr. Patricia Williams, a professor of social work at UCLA. It requires maintaining connections, preserving family relationships whenever possible, and always keeping the child's long-term well-being in mind. The case has also influenced legislation at both the state and federal level. The Family Preservation and Reunification Act, inspired in part by Maria's story, requires government agencies to make regular efforts to reunite separated families and provides funding for services to help families rebuild relationships after traumatic separations. Maria's courage in fighting for the truth has created a legacy that will help families for generations to come, said Congressman Rodriguez. No child should have to grow up believing they were abandoned when the truth is that they were loved enough for their parent to die protecting them. The power of truth. As I concluded my investigation into Maria's story, I was struck by the transformative power of truth, even when that truth comes decades late. Learning the real circumstances of her separation didn't erase the pain Maria had experienced, but it fundamentally changed how she understood her life and her family's history. The truth doesn't fix everything, Maria reflected during our final interview. I still lost 35 years with my siblings. I still grew up without my father. But understanding why those things happened has allowed me to stop carrying anger and start carrying love instead. The story has also demonstrated the importance of never giving up on the search for truth, even when that search seems hopeless. If Maria hadn't decided to hire a private investigator in 2020, her family might never have learned what really happened that night in 1990. Sometimes the truth is buried so deep that it seems impossible to find, Chen observed. But Maria's persistence proves that it's never too late to uncover the facts and seek justice. Looking forward today, Maria lives in Geneva, where she continues to work as a translator while managing the Roberto Santos Foundation. She speaks regularly with her siblings and visits Los Angeles several times a year to oversee the foundation's work and visit her father's grave. Her relationship with Hans Muller remains strong, and she considers him her father in every way that matters, while also honoring the memory of Roberto Santos. I have two fathers, she said, one who died to save me, and one who lived to love me. I'm grateful for both of them. The foundation continues to grow, helping families separated by violence, government intervention, and illegal adoption practices to find each other and rebuild their relationships. Each successful reunification serves as a testament to Roberto Santos's belief that family bonds are worth any sacrifice. Papa always said that family was the most important thing in the world, Maria remembered. He proved that by giving up everything, including his life, to protect his children. Now we're honoring his memory by helping other families stay together or find each other again. The enduring legacy. 5 years after beginning her search for the truth, Maria Santos Wagner has transformed from a woman haunted by questions about her past into a powerful advocate for family reunification and government accountability. Her story has exposed systematic failures in child protection services, led to significant legal reforms, and helped dozens of families reconnect. But perhaps most importantly, it has served as a reminder that the truth, no matter how painful or complex, is always preferable to lies, even well-intentioned ones. Children deserve to know their stories, Maria said as we concluded our months of interviews. They deserve to understand where they came from, why decisions were made about their lives, and who fought to protect them. The truth might be painful, but it's also liberating. The Roberto Santos Foundation continues to operate from its headquarters in Los Angeles, where a photograph of Roberto Santos hangs in the lobby alongside photos of all the families that have been reunited through the foundation's work. The inscription beneath his photo reads, "A father's love knows no limits." Maria visits that photo every time she's in Los Angeles, and she always whispers the same words. "We understand now, Papa. We forgive you. And we're proud to be your children." In a world where families are separated by violence, poverty, and systemic failures, Maria's story serves as both a warning and a source of hope. It reminds us that love and sacrifice can transcend even the most difficult circumstances, and that the truth, no matter how long buried, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As I finished writing this account, I received a message from Maria informing me that the foundation had just helped reunite twin sisters who had been separated through a similar network in 1993. After 32 years apart, they were finally going home to each other. That's what Papa would have wanted, Maria wrote. Every family deserves the chance to be whole again. The Roberto Santos Foundation provides support and resources for families separated by violence, government intervention, and illegal adoption practices. If you or someone you know has been affected by family separation, you can find more information and support at their website. Maria Santos Wagner continues to share her story in hopes of helping other families find the truth about their own separations and reunifications. This investigation was conducted over a period of 8 months, with interviews conducted in person, via video call, and through written correspondence. All names and identifying details have been verified through public records, court documents, and corroborating testimony. The author wishes to thank the Santos family for their courage in sharing their story and their continued commitment to helping other families in similar situations. Call to action. If this story has moved you, please consider sharing it with others who might benefit from learning about the Roberto Santos Foundation's work. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is help spread the truth and support families in their search for answers about their past. Every share, every conversation, and every moment of awareness brings us closer to a world where no family has to suffer in silence, wondering what happened to their loved ones.